You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. After illnesses and all kinds of things, we're back. Of course, we're an hour later than usual, due once again to unforeseen circumstances. The point is, we are here. And we're back, of course, reviewing The Mandalorian Season 3, which is actually a really interesting season so far. And honestly, these last two, the one, Chapter 20, which just premiered 2 days ago, and then Chapter 19, which we should have reviewed last week, but again, we weren't on, so we're taking them both. Hey, Ronaldo's up. What's going on? I'm Ronaldo. Good to see you. So we're actually going to review both of these very different episodes, which I think they almost complement each other in a way, because Chapter 19 really felt like an Andor episode to me. I mean, it was very much in the style of Andor. It was almost like this is the Mandalorian trying to be Andor. And then, of course, Chapter 20, we went back to what we were usually familiar with, more the fun adventure type of a thing, some depth. I mean, it was more what we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, let's keep saying episode. Chapter 19.
Yeah, I know. I do the same thing.
Chapter 19 was a very interesting twist, like you said, and I completely agree with you. That definitely gave the Andor vibes.
And it was really
but I really
long,
enjoyed
too.
it, though.
It was like
it
an
was
hour.
A longer episode. Yeah, it was like actually a full hour, and I was just like,
very
wow.
Andor-like.
I wish they would right. I wish they were all like that, honestly.
I know.
But it was really cool, and it was a turn I didn't expect. You know,
Yeah.
like, because it started off one way, and then like it's almost like you had two different shows in one show.
Well, in a way, I
'Cause
mean,
it
the
kinda
way I
started
looked
off
at
like
it,
with
well,
Mandalorian, then it switched to like an
right.
Andor-ish type thing.
But basically what was happening was they were more or less wrapping up what had happened in Chapter 18. So it was almost like the epilogue of 18. I felt the same way. I thought, well, you know, it almost would have made more sense in a way, even though I know they were sort of bookending it. But it's almost like that first part should have actually been on the previous episode, because obviously it picks up right where we left off, right? But then, like you said, it just goes in this completely different direction. And it's weird because we hadn't, like, Dr. Pershing, we haven't really seen him, I don't think, since season 1, right? He wasn't in season 2, was he?
Correct. Yeah, Dr. Pershing was, of course, a big pivotal person in 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of disappeared, and then, you know, here he is again. And I like his story.
I know.
I mean, I was talking with my grandfather about the show, and, you know, he didn't like the fact that, you know, and I get it, because he wanted to see more of the Mandalorian, the adventure, action type stuff. He wanted to see that. And then he wasn't ready for the whole political kind of switch in the middle of a show. But I mean, and I can understand how that could be jarring, because you kind of have your palette set for one thing, and then, like you said, you expect this episode to kind of be an Andor. But I thought it was really cool how they're kind of showing you like what's going on in other parts of the galaxy while Mando's running around doing his thing. This is what else is kind of taking place.
Well, the other thing, too, is that it gives us a little bit of a window in. It's world building, because the Empire's been defeated, and we know we have people like Moff Gideon and all those guys running around, and we know from the expanded universe and things like that. And I shouldn't really call it the expanded universe, because that implies Legends, although obviously that was covered a lot in Legends. But even the new canon novels, you know that, okay, the Empire's been defeated, and yes, you still have remnants and warlords and stuff like that, people fighting for the power, but then you pretty much have all these displaced officers, because as you and I have talked about over and over again, most of the people in the Empire were not these evil guys out to take over the galaxy. You know, they were just normal people. The Republic turned into the Empire, and they're thinking, okay, well, this is the legitimate government. So, you know, they're thinking they're doing the right thing. And I thought it was really cool how chapter 19 really illustrated that point, because you had that whole conversation around the table, you know, when Pershing first gets there. And they're just kind of talking. I mean, you know, they're reminiscing about those little square food things or whatever.
Oh, little, like wafers.
Yeah, those like wafer things that they kind of missed that. You know, what are some of the things you missed about the Empire? But they really did touch on the fact that, oops, we thought we were fighting for the right side, and it turned out that no, not at all, actually. And they were horrified by that, and there's probably a lot of people. And I thought it was nice how they covered, here's how the New Republic is handling all of these Imperial officers that just suddenly are there. You know, they're not necessarily a threat. They're not trying to. So there's like this whole rehabilitation thing, and I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. Well, first of all, his whole little TED talk that he did in the beginning, like, he was kind of explaining, like, look, you know, this is what, you know,
Yeah, it's funny because that is what it
this is what I
reminded me
do.
of. It's like
Yeah,
a TED
it's just
talk.
yeah. He was just kind of out there, just like telling everybody, like, look, I'm into genetics and I'm trying to do this, and like this, what I thought I was doing. The Empire made me believe it was this, and it's almost kind of like a public denouncing of the Empire. You know,
Yeah,
that's kind of what it was like. You know, and then Gideon had me doing this. I'm thinking that okay, and once again, I was duped, and I just want to do my science. I'm horrified at the atrocities that they've done, and even if I was a part of that in some way, shape, or form, so it was just basically like an open dialogue of just like, look, guys, it's like a tell-all. Like, look, I had no idea, this was going on, and by the time I did, it was too late, and I was kind of like under pressure, and I'm like, look, I'm not trying to be this way. And even watching him trying to like I believe Dr. Pershing, because even when we first saw him in season 1, he didn't look, I mean, granted, he's just a little nerdy scientist or whatever, but he never gave you the impression that he was really trying to be all like a nefarious mad scientist type of guy. He was just
no. In
kind of
fact, didn't he help Din break Grogu out eventually?
yeah,
I
something
mean,
to
it's
that
been a
effect.
minute since I've seen season 1, I have to admit, but I know that he was like part of it. But if I remember correctly, there was an episode where he sort of realized what Gideon was doing, and he helped a little bit.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, because I think he was well, he might have been. I think he did. No, he did pop up in season 2,
yeah, I kept that ever since
but
I
he
had
was
said
he
that.
was
That bugged me.
yeah, he popped up in season 2, but he popped up as that as a hologram.
Oh
When he
yeah,
talked about the M count, that's when we heard the M
yes,
count thing
yes,
again. Remember?
right. Oh
That was
yes,
him.
I do
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. Well,
Ronaldo says, I think chapter 19 is the best one so far. And then he goes on to say, but even though I love it, it felt like it belonged to a different show, but it was still awesome. But that's the thing, though, is the fact that, again, and I'm going to probably say this a lot when we reference this episode, but it really felt like this was the Mandalorian trying to be Andor.
hmm
It really had a strong Andor vibe to me. And I think that in a lot of ways, too, it almost reminds you a little bit of the Book of Boba Fett, where there were 2 episodes where, look, it's Mandalorian season 2.5 now. You
right.
know, they were always joking that, for like 2 episodes, Boba Fett wasn't even in his own show. And
hmm
I mean, at least you got an appearance by Din in the beginning. They basically wrapped up what happened in chapter 18. But again, at the same time, I thought that it was a really nice detour, even though, like you said, it does sort of feel like a different show. Like I said, it gave me Andor vibes, but And that's the thing about Andor is really, really, I mean, it's vastly different from any of the other
Hmm.
live action shows. And of course, The Mandalorian basically has its own vibe, and a lot of the other shows, like Obi-Wan and all that, they have a little bit of a different feel to them, but they're all related in a way, whereas Andor is completely its own thing. And that's what this episode was really borrowing from, but I think at the same time, you have to think about it in the sense of, and once we actually are able to put this through the lens of the entire season, right? Instead of just looking at it as an individual episode, we'll probably see where this fits. But I think what we're going to find is that this was a very necessary episode, that it's actually bridging something.
Yeah. And that's what I was kind of, my grandfather and I had the conversation because we often talk about the show and things we like, things we didn't like. And he said, although he didn't like the fact that they just kind of migrated into that whole Dr. Pershing centric, part of the story, he did acknowledge the fact that, this is going to come up again. Like, his whole story
Yeah.
is a part of this season some way, somehow, and I definitely get it. We talked about um what we were going to expect from season 3.
Mm-hmm.
Things, questions and things that we needed to have answered, right?
Yeah.
And so I believe that we can kind of surmise what Gideon was trying to do with Grogu, seeing that he got Dr. Pershing, and what his specialty is. But we don't know exactly what he's trying to do. But we haven't seen Gideon yet this season.
Well, I was
So
going
I'm
to
very
say
curious.
I think that's part of it. I think part of the reason why they focus on Pershing was that's the bridge to where they're going to bring Gideon in soon. Because you're right, we
Yeah,
haven't
because
seen Gideon yet.
yeah, and I believe that he's going to, and Giancarlo, this gentleman who plays Moff Gideon,
Giancarlo
he's prime.
Esposito. Yeah.
Yeah, he pretty much promised that, like, this season, it's going to be some epic
Mm-hmm.
stuff to this. And so, he's coming, and it's just a matter of how and when and why,
Right.
and
Right.
that's really the thing. So, but I think this is the, like you said, the setup of Gideon, because like now, you got your head scientist, the guy who was really spearheading your whole plan, whatever that may be. He's recited with the New Republic now, and you're on trial for war crimes and all this stuff with the New Republic. So it's going to be interesting, and like, I'm sure there's going to be courts and tribunals and seeing how all that stuff plays out and what is to come of all of this. And of course, Grogu and Mando are kind of in the center of it all because you know that's who they were after to begin with.
Well, and even moving through this episode, you have, I mean, obviously they reintroduced him. One of the things that I really liked too was the fact that this episode was allowed to breathe more than a lot of the other episodes. Now, of course, part of that
Yes,
was it's twice as long as most of the episodes. So there
true.
is that. But it's also just the pacing of the episode anyway. I mean, even if you just take the first 30 minutes of the episode, it was still it was allowed to breathe basically. And I think that that was not only a very deliberate thing, but it was also a refreshing thing to see in this series. Is it, and
Hmm.
I mean, there was plenty of action because, oh, what was the woman's name? The main one.
Oh, the
The
one
one
who
that
was
ends
on
up
Gideon's
like,
ship.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Which
that
I,
that whole thing, I already knew, like, from the get go, like, she wasn't to be trusted.
well,
There's
but
something
here's the
about
thing
her
that's
that just
weird about that, though. See, and this is the thing that where I felt so bad for Pershing was the fact that, I mean, she basically dragged him into it. He was just going to be
right.
like, you know what? I'm just going to do my job. I'm going to go back to my little apartment. I'm going to maybe sightsee. And that's it. And she's like, no, don't you want your lab? Don't you want, I mean, she's leading him the whole time. And I just felt so bad about that. But I do have to say, one of the other things, speaking of things that I really loved, I really enjoyed seeing a lot more of Coruscant in this episode.
Man,
I mean, it
yeah.
was such breathtaking visuals and just some of the lore, and you got to really feel, just like we always said that in the Bad Batch, even when they're not showing Palpatine, or in Andor, even though they're not showing Palpatine, you could definitely feel his presence in the Coruscant scenes.
Mm-hmm.
In this, you actually could feel his lack of presence, that everybody could just relax and breathe and just be normal again. And the New Republic isn't really an overly oppressive regime either. They're basically like, okay, look, we're going to take in you former Imperials. You're basically going to renounce the Empire and be like, okay, we're not going to be like this anymore. And we're going to set you up with jobs and housing and, a little community or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and everything's going to be cool. And you felt bad for Pershing because he was on board with all of this. And then she kept
Sure.
goading him, and you knew, it's kind of like you said, you knew something was up.
Yeah, when he saw her, he was kind of freaked out because he was just like, "Whoa, I didn't expect
Yeah,
to see
like you
somebody
said.
from Gideon's camp, out here."
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, so that was number one. But then, you know, she, Leah comes off very, you know, she came off, very sweet, like, well,
Mm-hmm.
almost like part of the crew, but you still got that vibe, like, yeah, something's not right about this chick. She's, and the more she kept trying to get him to break the rules and stuff like that, it's kind of like, see, why? Just let him do his, and he was somewhat kind of content with doing his job. I mean, of course, he wanted to get back to his research, and he that's because that's who he is, and even
Well, he
listen to
knew
his
that it
story
was
about like his
important.
mom.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other thing that was kind of cool about that part of it was, and again, this is a theme that I hope they actually explore further in this show, is the fact that this research was being misused by Gideon for something nefarious and horrible.
Hmm.
But his whole thing was like, look, if I could actually continue this could actually help the New Republic. I mean, this is, I mean, this isn't just
Groundbreaking
some,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
this isn't like Palpatine's weird alchemy and, you know, cloning and all these weird things he was trying to do. I mean, there was cloning involved, obviously, but
Right.
it just was something to where, she was, or he essentially was motivated. And I think this is why he basically fell for all of her prodding and goading and stuff like that, is because he's like, no, I mean, if I could continue this, it could help the New Republic. But like you said, though, he was content not really pursuing it. Like, well, okay, it's illegal. I mean, whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
these are the rules.
these are the
I'll
rules.
abide
I'm
by
gonna
them.
follow them. Yeah. Ronaldo
Yeah.
says she didn't give me good vibes, but she sold the good girl act pretty well to deceive Pershing. And
Oh yeah.
And that's it. I mean, even there were parts of the episode, because like at first you mistrusted her instantly because she was part of Gideon's team. But then you also, as an audience member, started trusting her a little bit. And she
You
did,
want to
man.
trust her. That's the thing. That you
Yeah.
want to trust her. I mean, I
Yeah.
never did, but I wanted to though. Yeah, I mean, like I wanted to trust her, but the fact that like, okay, like I said, she did cool gestures. Like she got him the whole like case of like those little wafer cookies or whatever, and then
Yeah.
um,
And then she ultimately got him that lab, although that's where she was basically setting him up. But
yeah, but even the whole when they went for that little walk with the little popsicle thing, which I thought was, I always love when Star Wars takes common things that we do on here on Earth
I
and they
know.
space them up.
Well, and
So just like,
again, now, you know how we're
you
always talking
know,
about the genre stuff, right? You remember how we
hmm
used to joke about the whole romantic comedy kind of thing? I mean,
hmm
it was getting to that point. I mean, it kind of had that little date night
hmm
rom-com vibe to it, It was, and like you said, I mean, this just shows you, look, this could work in Star Wars. if you
Yeah.
want to take genre stuff. And I do too. I love the whole fact that they're, like you said, they're taking very common things that we do every day, but they're plopping it into the Star Wars universe, and suddenly it becomes more interesting.
Yeah. Right now you got a glowing popsicle now. It's just like, okay, well, and they
Right. You're
call it
not going
something
around
different.
Manhattan, you're walking around Coruscant, it's
Exactly. Exactly. That's essentially what Coruscant is New York, you know.
yeah, just
Um,
the whole planet.
right. But yeah, but the whole thing when they go with them going sneaking out to get and she was just kind of saying like, well, yeah, he's all nervous, like, have you done this before? He's like, where do you think I got those cookies from? And
Yeah, going
to
on
see
that
them just like
decommissioned
walk
Star
around
Destroyer, man.
a decommissioned Star Destroyer, man, like,
That was cool.
man.
That was cool. But even that whole scene, like on the, I guess what would be a subway or a monorail or whatever you want to call it.
Oh yeah.
Again, very espionage oriented kind of thing. And that's, again, where it had more of an Andor vibe to it.
Mm-hmm.
It was that tension on, and how many times have we seen this in movies where you got the two people that are trying to do something on the down low on a train, and then the bad guys get on the train, and then it's sort of this cat and mouse thing, and it was,
Yeah, you
but
gotta
this
kind of
time,
jump the train. Yeah,
right,
jump the cars and stuff.
we've seen it a million times, but in Star Wars, though, we haven't. So suddenly, a typical movie trope that has been used a gazillion times suddenly feels fresh.
Yeah. I mean, and then of course the double cross, like, okay, when they finally get off the Star Destroyer and they're trying to run, and then she's like, okay, she's now in the office of trying to see if he's needs to be reconditioned, and she's getting him tortured. All of a sudden, it's just like, okay, did Gideon kind of put her, or is she doing this for Gideon? Because that's what it sounds like. Like she's trying to break him out, or she's trying to, because he's basically threw him under the bus, and so she's kind of like paying him back for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, because that's a weird thing, too. And then at the end of this thing, I'm trying to remember now, because again, we were supposed to do this last Friday. I remember she told the guy, "Hey, I'll take care of this or whatever." Weren't they
Hmm.
like, oh, it was that weird mind thing that
Yeah, they were
actually
trying to
gave me,
recondition him.
yeah, recondition him, which actually,
Kind of remind me of Total Recall a little bit
it
too.
reminded me of Flash Gordon. There's a scene
Mm.
in Flash Gordon where they were trying to erase Zarkov's mind, and it was almost the same kind of deal. Um, yeah, it was really, really strange. But
Yeah,
here's another. Let's see, Charlie Hep. Whoa. I don't know if I can decipher this one. Yeah. Well, when you get your
yeah. I need a.
yeah, I need an interpreter for that one, Charlie. When you get your keyboard under control, feel free to chat in. Ronaldo says the train scene was great. I think he meant to say. I guess everybody's keyboard is acting up today. The only thing that I didn't like was that they jumped off the train and did not injure themselves in the fall at all. But
Yeah.
in their defense, they did kind of roll and do that tuck and roll thing that you can do, right? Like
Hmm.
that's a technique that you can use. Now, granted, it was a high-speed train. I mean, it was kind of like they got up and they weren't even the least bit shaken or whatever.
All right, like nothing hurt. They're just like, all right.
Yeah, just exactly.
No one said ow or anything like.
No, and so yes, that I have to admit that was a little, and I did think the same thing, where I was just like, that was just a little bit too easy for them. But again, I mean, the episode was just so good that I could overlook stuff like that.
Now, on to chapter 20. Um, Man, this was a cool episode. I really, really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's kind of like I said at the very beginning of the show, right? These are two very different episodes, but yet they're
Hmm.
really good. I mean, they were equally good, and
Yeah.
they're but chapter 20 was a little bit more what we would be used to from this show. This is a little bit
Right.
more,
Typical Mandalorian.
yeah, typical Mandalorian. Exactly.
So one of the things I loved is this, the whole Foundling thing, right? They're having this whole, could tell Bo-Katan. What I loved, it was cool. It is from the continuation from the other episode when they welcome them into the coven. It's like, okay, we can join our thing. You haven't taken your helmet off. You bathe in the waters. You can stay here with us. If this is what you want to do.
Yes, now that you
And so,
purified yourself in the waters of Lake Minnetonka.
right.
I can't let that one go.
But yeah, so I thought that was cool. And then now you see them on the beach training and whatnot. And then of course now it comes to the Foundlings, and now you got this like 10-year-old, that's out there, and you got little Grogu walking up. And now he's trying to like put him into the combat situation. It's just like, okay. If Grogu can catch the concept of what's going on here, Grogu's totally gonna kick the crap out of this kid.
Right.
Because this kid has no idea, like, what what Grogu is. But the fact that they try to stick the little blaster, the little
Yeah, a
dart
little dart thing on him.
launcher,
Mhm.
like that thing was almost as big as he was.
Well, and it was great too because now, you always had Din obviously being like the father figure, but now Bo-Katan is kind of like the mother figure for Grogu. It's sort of like now they're co-parenting in a way, because she's strapping it
Right.
on him, saying, look, my dad did this too, so it's it's cool. Just do whatever. And it was interesting to see that dynamic that now Din's trying to be like, okay, he was doing his baby Yoda-ish things when he was messing with the little animals and the rocks or whatever,
Oh, like
and
the little
it's like,
crabs.
yeah, and probably going to try to eat them, I'm sure. But
Hmm.
essentially what I really thought was cool was the fact that, it was now we're going to switch gears. Like, we got to be serious about this now. And now Din's really trying to instruct him in the ways of the Mandalorian. And this is something that we hadn't really seen since Luke was dealing with Grogu.
Hmm.
And I still like the fact, this is another little thing that I just want to point this out before I forget it, because you don't really see this that well until a little bit later in the episode when the armor goes to put that new little armor plate on him.
Hmm.
But I still think it's kind of cool that Grogu, still honors both, right? Like, he's got his little chainmail Beskar armor on, but then he has his Jedi robe over it,
Hmm.
which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I love that. Go ahead.
well, before we get into this, we got some chats here, and then of course, that's what we do. We discuss things. So Ronaldo says this is a Monster of the Week episode, but with character development for Bo-Katan. And he says, I love the bird monster and the baby monster designs. Yeah. Yeah,
It was basically essentially like a pterodactyl.
It was.
Or like House of Dragons. It's kind of remind me of Game of Thrones a little bit.
Yep. I mean, but here's the thing, and this is where Ronaldo kind of takes the thing. He says, but at some point, are they going to learn that there are a lot of monsters in that river? It's like, because it's true. Because, and he says, because it's not the first time that they're attacked. And I was sort of thinking the same thing. I mean, even though that thing came from, I don't know, like over the horizon or something. One of the things that I really thought was interesting was the fact that, I mean, he basically you basically have this little beach that they're training on or whatever, but there's all these monsters that keep coming out. And then even at the end, right, when they finally defeated that pterodactyl looking thing, then that other thing came up, and it's sort of like,
Oh yeah, and
maybe, yeah, maybe you
it's like
guys,
Jurassic Park over
exactly.
there.
But I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, maybe you just might not want to train by the beach. If there's going to be a lot of
Yeah,
these things, I
right.
mean, I just don't know. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot of, the thing too is, again, this was, by contrast, this is only a 30-minute episode. But yet, even though they packed a lot into it, there was there's a lot of depth in this episode. There was a good pacing, and you got to deal a little bit in the beginning with Grogu now taking on a little bit more of the Mandalorian thing. You had, I mean, because these are the basic themes here. You had bo-katan, who is now further accepting the whole Children of the Watch or whatever. Like, she's becoming more a part of their group and adopting their ways, and I guess coming back to terms with her Mandalorianness or whatever. And then of course you have Grogu, who has that really cool flashback scene. So we find out a little bit more about how he escaped Order 66, which I thought that was kind of a nice touch. You had the adventure with them trying to rescue the Foundling from the pterodactyl-like creature. And that's where I thought that the title of the episode was really clever, because it's called The Foundling. And on one hand, it's dealing with rescuing this kidnapped Foundling, but on the other hand, it's really dealing with Grogu and his development and growth.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, seeing him, in that combat situation, first he's getting tagged, and then he does his whole Jedi flip and then completely just like waste the kid with like all 3 shots. That was super cool. Grogu earns just like, his first little piece of armor for himself. It's like this little disc, or what have you. And then yeah, this kid gets kind of literally kidnapped by this giant pterodactyl looking thing. And I love the fact that they all just took off after the thing. And it's like, okay, either that thing flew a long ways, because I've never seen all these guys just run out of fuel for their jetpacks.
I like that, though. I really enjoyed that part. The fact that they ran out of fuel in mid. See, this is another one of those practical things that should happen, but a lot of times doesn't. Where it seems like these guys can fly forever. But I love the fact that no, they, they're kind of like, well, we're out of fuel, so. And it's like, yeah, this thing always gets away.
Comes with the ship.
Yep.
Yeah, and then bo-katan comes with the ship because she's.
Now, did you think that was Grogu at first? Because I did.
No, I didn't think it was Grogu.
I did, because Grogu flew the ship before when he,
Well, he put in
and he was looking off. He was looking off like when they all flew off, and I thought maybe they're gonna do a thing to where they're all flying off, and Grogu's like, all right, well, I don't have a jetpack, so I'll just take the ship.
Well, he flew the N1, and the thing is like, one, he really didn't fly it. He just basically told the droid to fly it, basically.
Well, yeah, there is that.
So yeah, but I thought it was cool though how bo-katan kind of was like, okay, she got with the crew, and she kind of started to see like, okay, you could tell in her mind she's thinking like, I want to lead these guys at some point. Like she wants to take over, restart Mandalorian. And she has a nice little group of people who can do it. I also love the fact that she was kind of clueless when it was time to eat. She was like, okay,
oh yeah, I know.
How are we supposed to eat if we can't take these helmets off?
Yeah, how does this work?
Yeah. And then like you got some of the culture like, oh, well, because you're leading the mission, you have the honor to stand by the fire. It's just like, she's like, oh, all right. Like she's still learning. Like she's learning this whole way that it's kind of it's foreign to her because this is not exactly the way she grew up.
Well,
with
see,
it.
but this is why I think it's so cool. And I mean, I have to confess, I'd have to do this again. I mean, I remember this, but not with clarity if I had gone back and watched the Clone Wars. Because, obviously, bo-katan, Paz Vizsla, Satine, the Children of the Watch, Darth Maul, that whole story arc. I forgot what season that was, like 4 or something. But that was like a big thing. And the whole Children of the Watch thing or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
That was a thing, right? So now you fast forward to this point. Now she's with these people because, she hated them. She actually blamed them for the fall of Mandalore because they had sided with Maul and Maul took over. So there's, in other words, there's a lot that you can really unpack in these episodes if you actually go back and watch some of the source material from which this stuff spawned. I mean, you can take it on its own, obviously, right?
Sure.
I mean, you don't have to go back and watch all these episodes in order to enjoy this, but it does give you a little bit of a new spin on things, and it deepens your understanding of all this stuff. Before we go on, let me hit this thing from Ronaldo real quick. He says, you think Bo will eventually embrace the Mandalorian way? I kind of think she's starting to.
I think there's a part of her that's going to try to do a little bit of both. I think she's going to try to bring some of the old ways back, but also adapt some of the new as well.
Well, don't forget the fact that, she saw that, and I guess that, we find out that that's what that creature was that she saw in the...
Yeah, it's a Minotaur.
Or whatever.
Minosaurus or Minosaur.
Yeah, I think it's Minosaurus or something. Yeah. And then, of course, we had to bring this up because this is a good time. Ronaldo says, I was so happy to see Ahmed Best again. He's the best. Okay, I see what you did there, Ronaldo.
Right, Ronaldo.
Yeah, it was. It was nice to actually see, him getting a little bit of a second life in Star Wars.
Yeah, in a different capacity and be redeemed in a way. Like, you don't have to play Jar Jar anymore. You can actually be a full Jedi. And
yeah, his name, his last name is back he has a name. It's like Krenlin or something like that back. It's like BEQ is the last name. They actually have this whole thing on him. So I'll be interested to see if, I don't know, this spawns anything because obviously, like everything else, they've named the character. And then of course Ronaldo corrects us on this one. He says it's the Mythosaur. Yes, thank you.
Mythosaur.
Yeah, I mean, I knew Ronaldo. If Ronaldo's watching, he's usually our encyclopedia. He always corrects us on this stuff. But yeah, it
Kelleran Beck.
Kelleran was the name. Kelleran Beck. Yes. So, who knows where that's going to lead, but it is nice that Ahmed Best got a second chance to be accepted again in Star Wars and to, not be Jar Jar, basically. Because, I mean, if you think about it, this is a guy, like him and Jake Lloyd both had the whole thing, right? Like Ahmed Best was suicidal at one point. He was basically going to, jump off a bridge or something. I mean, you have to understand, as fans, sometimes we don't really think about how this is affecting actors. I mean, Jake Lloyd ended up leaving Hollywood because of it. Now, the thing that's interesting about it, though, is one of the things that Jake Lloyd said was, he was just being made fun of like crazy at school and all that. And I'm like, I don't know, dude, you're like in a Star Wars film, I mean, I guess, sure, they could be like, are you an angel? They could probably make fun of some of the lines. Bottom line is, if I had been him, I would have been like, yeah, I was just in one of the biggest movies ever. What have you done?
And I got paid for it, mind you.
And I got paid for it. And, I'm like famous. I mean, he was in Jingle All the Way with Schwarzenegger. It's like, I don't know. I'm just thinking maybe maybe because I'm different. It's
Well, but you know how it is with kids. It's like, especially because the parents of those kids who were probably like, "Oh, this kid is stupid." Oh yeah, he's in my class. And they probably just, of course, kids are just cruel and mean, and that's what they
well,
do at that
sure,
age.
but I
So of
mean, it
course
just
you're gonna.
the fact that he leaves Hollywood over it, though. And again, I mean, obviously, we don't know the whole story. We don't. I mean, people are different, right? I mean, it affects people different. I'm just
Mhm.
saying. I'm thinking personally, I probably could have gotten over it. I mean, it wasn't that bad of a. I mean, it kind of was, but
Well, you
again,
gotta think about it. Like his movie, quintessentially, as everyone said at that time, it wasn't until recently until everybody started. All right, the prequels weren't that bad, but
right?
everybody was saying like, the Phantom Menace was horrible. I mean, outside of Darth Maul, it was stupid. It was bad. I mean, so yeah, you were in Star Wars, but your movie ruined the
Yeah,
franchise.
right. That is
You,
that
s- I
is a
mean,
good point,
like,
actually. Yeah. See, it
it's
isn't
kind of
until we
like,
got the sequel trilogy. Once the sequel trilogy hit, it's kind of like, hey, you know what? Prequels are actually not too bad. Yeah. No, you're right. So let's see. We got Ronaldo. Um, he says, I remember I used to say that Jar Jar saving Grogu was a dumb idea. It kind of happened. Yeah, kind of.
sort of,
He says, do you
yeah.
think that Jar Jar actually sent that Naboo ship to save Grogu? There's actually some dialogue online that people are thinking that Padme did it. That's the general consensus,
Mm.
is that Padme sent the ship. Now, the timeline might be a little off because at the time that this is happening,
She's
um,
already over on
she's pretty
Mustafar.
much, she's pretty much flying off to Mustafar at this point. Kind of. I mean, I guess it really depends on when that happened because Anakin led the temple attack and wiped out everybody, and then he went to Mustafar. Padme at this point is still at her apartment, and that's when Obi-Wan comes and visits her and says, hey, Anakin attacked the temple, killed a bunch of younglings. I'm going to have to go kill him now. And it's after that she decides, you know what, I got to go try to see if I can reason with him or find out what's going on. And of course, Obi-Wan stows away on the ship. That's basically the timeline. So depending, because what's his name? Krellin? I'm at best Jedi character.
Kelleran.
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 Yeah, I'll eventually remember these things. Kelleran basically is saving Grogu at this point while the clones are still probably mopping up after Anakin left. So it really depends on when this is taking place. Because conceivably, Padme could still be at her apartment. But see, the thing is, she doesn't know there's a problem yet. Right? Because Obi-Wan has to come and tell her that.
Yeah, I think it might be a Bail, honestly.
It could be Bail, although it is a Naboo starfighter. So the idea that it could be Jar Jar. Or you remember how everybody thought that Jar Jar was a Sith Lord pulling all the strings? Hey, maybe
Oh
he was
yeah.
secretly a Jedi, right? And he just
Oh my lord.
morphed into Kelleran.
Jeez.
You know it's going to happen. It's going to happen. People are going to start speculating. But, I mean, I don't know. It's just one of those things where I think that it's interesting the way that they're weaving all this stuff in because, yeah, exactly. Who sent the starfighter? Right?
Hmm.
I mean,
Well,
there's...
it could have just been there too, though.
Well, yes. I mean, it wasn't an uncommon thing. Like, everybody assumes that when you see these Naboo starfighters or ships or whatever,
Mm.
that they automatically belong to somebody. Now, the difference, though, is that one being that whole chromed out thing, that was usually a royalty kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
that honestly could denote somebody of importance, and that's why people think it was Padme. The fact that it's a Naboo fighter, or cruiser or whatever, because they had different classifications of those ships.
Well, and it did, if I'm not mistaken, it had the royal guard. It had her guards because I think they were dressed
Yeah,
like Captain Typho.
right.
So who were kind of like, well, we'll hold them off while you guys kind of stow away. So
Yeah. And then Ronaldo says, I think that ship will get attacked by pirates and won't arrive to Naboo. There's a lot of different things that you could speculate on with that. Because again, that timeline is so tight in between there. And that's where, honestly, Favreau and Filoni, while they're playing in this fertile playground that is pretty much the franchise, right? Because they could go at any point now because they're taking place after Return of the Jedi. And they say that The Mandalorian is probably going to butt up against Force Awakens. I've been reading that lately, too. Which would make sense because with the whole Pershing thing, with all this other stuff, it seems like they're trying to set up the whole Palpatine coming back thing. It's almost like they're softly retconning or rebooting the sequel trilogy. Not necessarily the concept, obviously, but just the way that things were done. Or at the very least, they're trying to explain how things were done. Because remember, one of our big things, and I'm sure we're going to get to this when we review The Rise of Skywalker in a couple of weeks, is the fact that, Palpatine just sent this message and was just like, okay, I'm back. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, the Emperor's back or whatever. We're like, whoa, hold on. And then everybody's using the term Sith like, it's just some common thing. And again, and I know I'm going to bring this up because I brought this up when we did the initial review. I'm sure when I go back and watch it again for when we review it, it's going to bother me again. It's bothering me now. And that is, for all this time, including even The Force Awakens, like, oh, I thought the Jedi were a myth. I thought Luke Skywalker was a myth. No, the Jedi are real, the Force, all of it's true. 2 movies later, everybody's like, Sith this and Sith that. The Sith, there was like 2 of them at a time. The Jedi, not that long ago, like 30 years ago, there was like 10,000 of them. I mean, granted, I know the whole Palpatine thing, and he wiped it out, and I get that. But the Sith were a lot more secretive. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but you also said that they were also a race, not just, a title.
Yeah, like 10, 15,000 years before.
Well, obviously not, because there's quite a gang of them on Exegol.
Well, yeah.
Dude, it's like a football stadium. It's like Ford Field in there, man. It's just like, and there's nothing but Sith, It's like, all right.
Well, yeah, the acolytes. Honestly, the next 2 episodes, well, okay, so Monday, this is actually a good time to preview this, right? Monday, we're going to be doing The Force Awakens. I think. We're supposed to do it last Monday. I hope we do it this Monday. So this Monday, we should be doing The Force Awakens, which means the week after that, we're going to do The Last Jedi. And I know, Ronaldo, The Last Jedi holds a special place in your heart. You love that film. And we like it too. But we do know that there's a lot of issues. So The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker should be really fun episodes because that's when things take a little bit of a turn to where we could start really unleashing against it again. Right? Because, generally The Force Awakens was a little bit different. People liked it. But that was one of the things. It was the fact that this whole time, Palpatine was pretty much hiding away and raising up these Sith acolytes or something. Now, the Acolyte series that's coming up isn't going to deal with this at all because that takes place toward the end of the High Republic. In fact, it'll be the first live action depiction that we have of anything that takes place around the High Republic. So it's going to be interesting to see, number one, how many seasons does a Mandalorian plan to go if they want to cover all the time period, like the whole 30 years between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. That's going to be the
Mhm.
first thing that's going to be really interesting to me. And secondly, how are they gonna do that? Are they gonna, is it gonna be like a 10-year jump or something between a couple of the seasons? Who knows? But it is interesting that they're giving this Jedi a name. Of course, they give everybody a name in the Star Wars universe. You could be some blurry, out of focus character in the back of a film, and they've got an entire name, backstory, and there's some fan that knows who they are too. We are not that fan. Obviously, I couldn't even remember Kelleran's name like 10 minutes after you said it, right? So,
Right.
but again, it was good to see Ahmed Best back, and it was also good that they're starting to try to fill in some of the gaps of the timeline and figuring out, who did provide the Naboo starfighter for them? How did Grogu get out? And I really thought that flashback thing, when he's watching the Forge thing coming down and it starts triggering,
His memories.
his memory. It wasn't like he was in a Bacta tank like Boba Fett. It's like, oh boy, he's in the Bacta tank. You know what that means? Flashback time. No.
World.
Yeah. This is cool. And I mean, then, he gets his little plate that's got the mythosaur on it and all that, which I thought was pretty cool too. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, this episode was showing a lot of growth with Grogu as well. It's filling us a little bit in on his past, and it's also showing how, yes, he's growing into his future. He's starting to seriously now train in the ways of the Mandalorian. But you gotta wonder, he's gotta get a helmet at some point.
Well, yeah, that's why it's so funny. Like, where's his helmet? Like, well, he's too young to speak, so he can't put on a helmet yet.
Yeah, because he can't take the oath.
Right.
And my feeling is, I mean, it kind of makes you wonder what the helmet would even look like. Is it gonna like come out to cover his ears? Is it gonna have like two slits that'll come down kind of like around his ears? I mean, how are they gonna handle that? Do they expect him to just jam his ears in there or what?
No, it's probably gonna have something for his ears to poke out of.
These are the things that I think about. I've been thinking of that since season 1. I'm like, well, this dude becomes a Mandalorian. How are they gonna handle that? That is not a like Yoda-ish, whatever species that is not friendly for that species. But
yeah.
Well, I just think that the fact that, he basically is now starting to enter into a little bit more serious of a thing, as you brought up, he couldn't speak, which is why he can't wear a helmet, which is why he can't, do a lot of this stuff. But here's the thing. You think they're ever going to have him talk?
Well, he's trying to.
He is trying to, and he will make sounds. And, sometimes he'll turn around and be like, wait, what did he say? Did he just say, like, something, I don't know, like, remotely basic? That's English in the Star Wars universe, by the way, for people who don't know.
What would you rate this episode?
Well, you know what? We didn't even rate the last episode. The Pershing one. Chapter 19.
Would you rate both of them?
Well, before we get to that, let me just get to Ronaldo's comment real quick, and then we can start rating and wrapping up here. He says, I think he'll never talk. Maybe a word, but not talk. I don't know. I mean, who knows? It really depends
on how far. Depends on what they do with him.
Right. Because I don't think they're gonna kill him off. I mean, he's way too like the fans would like go insane if they killed him off. Well, let's see. The Pershing episode, so chapter 19. Oh man, you know what? I'm gonna give that one like a 9. I'm gonna give that one a 9. I'm gonna give this one an 8.5.
I could rock with that.
I
could rock with that.
Because I mean, I just think that that the chapter 19 was just such an outstanding episode for so many reasons. I mean, like I said, the pacing was great. It was able to breathe a little bit. It gave us an insight into, how does the New Republic handle all these former Imperial officers who just, they weren't really trying to do anything evil. They just were kind of part of the thing, But then at the same time, the New Republic can't afford to just let these guys roam free if they're, you don't know, especially on Coruscant, right? Because it's now the capital world. And then the things that I got to wonder, and this is what I'm hoping that this is building up. I mean, we know that this is a link to Gideon. We know that they're going to start bringing that part of the storyline into this. But here's the thing that I've been wondering since season 1, because you know that they're going to do this. Even if they don't bump up against The Force Awakens, you know they're going to get within range. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, they got to show the birth of the First Order. How does the Empire and the remnants of the Empire turn into the First Order? Because if you look at The Force Awakens, the First Order, and keep in mind, this is only like 30 years after Return of the Jedi. I mean, they're full-blown, man. They've got their own little Star Destroyers, their new Stormtrooper outfits. You got Kylo, you got Snoke. Yeah, you got like Starkiller Base that they somehow built. You've got like a fully fledged new empire, basically. So somehow that had to have developed. And then you got to wonder what Thrawn's role is in all this stuff. He's got to make an appearance at some point. And we've
here or the Ahsoka series, yeah.
Sure. Okay. So let's see. We got a couple of chats here. We got so Ronaldo gives chapter 19 a 9.5 out of 10, and chapter 20 a 7 out of 10. A little bit lower. Okay. Charlie actually kind of gives it even lower than that. He gives chapter 19 a 5.5 and 6.5 for chapter 20. So it didn't really, I guess, resonate as well with him. But of course,
it's all subjective, right?
It is subjective, and it's not. I mean, it's not horrible, right? Just means it's kind of it's average, But again, I think a lot of it too depends on, and this is a battle that we fought with a lot of people. Well, particularly with David, right? With Andor, remember those legendary exchanges?
Oh man,
where. And again, chapter 19 was a lot like Andor. And so Andor didn't really land with everybody. I mean, you just have to understand what it is, and you have to understand what they're trying to do, and you have to really get into the spirit of the whole thing. But again, yeah, I thought that, 19 was good, 20 was good. I'm looking forward to seeing what they have next. How many episodes are we doing for this one? Is it 8 or 10? I don't remember. Surprise.
10, I believe.
I think you're right. I think it is 10. I think it's 10 episodes. So if that's the case, that means we're getting close to halfway through the season, right? Because this is the 4th episode, chapter 20. So the next episode is going to be the 5th. By the way, I also want to give a little bit of a shout out here. Chapter 20 was actually directed by Carl Weathers.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought he did a really good job directing the episode. And hopefully we see a little bit more. I also hope we see more Grief Karga in this season.
Yeah, I did love his character.
Well, and that's the thing. I hope it's not going to be one of those things like, was it season 2? Yeah, I guess it was season 2. It almost seems like there have been more seasons than there have in this show. But I remember that he played such a prominent role in season 1. Season 2, it was kind of like him and Cara Dune were basically on that planet. And, Mandalorian's just like, hey, what's going on? And then see ya. And then that was it. So I was encouraged by his appearance in, it was either the 2nd or 3rd episode. So I'm really hoping that we see a little bit more Grief Karga in this. So now that we're getting close to the halfway point, what would you like to see in moving forward? Probably Gideon.
I need to see what happened to him or what's going on with him. I love his character, man. I really do.
Oh yeah, he's
So
great.
I'm really curious as to see what comes out of it. I know he's got a plan. I wonder if Thrawn's going to show up at any point.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot. I'm just great, and I'm curious at what's the end game for Grogu and Mando this season too.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. I'm glad you actually brought that up because that was something that I wanted to point out. I'm glad we did this before we ended the episode. Is the fact that unlike the last 2 seasons, there isn't like a sense of urgency for me to be like, oh man, I can't wait to see what the season finale is gonna be.
Mm-hmm.
I just it just kind of like this season seems to be just a go with the flow. You're just along for the ride, and you're just gonna see where it ends. There's not a big thing that you're anticipating for the season finale in this one. At least not yet. I mean, that could change within the next episode or two, but who knows? But yeah, I mean, let us know what you guys think in the comments. How you like this episode, how you would rate it, what'd you think about it? What do you guys want to see moving forward in this season? We want to know because, like I said, we do answer our comments. And then, of course, you're going to want to join us Monday night, 8 o'clock, in theory.
Force Awakens.
Force Awakens. Yep, we're moving into the sequel trilogy, so this should be interesting. And again, if you haven't been following us on Mondays, we have been going through this whole series where we're pretty much answering the question of what is Star Wars. So we did start out with this whole episode on the legacy of Star Wars and some of the influences that made up Star Wars and how George Lucas basically fashioned this whole space opera. And then we started moving into movie reviews. Another thing that's as of note, which I haven't even told you yet, really, but YouTube actually started this thing called YouTube Podcasts. And apparently they're a pretty big podcast consumption thing. And this show started out as a podcast. We used to be an audio podcast when we began, and then we morphed into a pre-recorded multicam switched episode to pretty much a multicam live stream episode. So what I did was I went back and I've turned all of our episodes, including new episodes like tonight's, into podcasts. So if you guys do consume podcasts or whatever on YouTube, then, you'll want to check it out. And maybe if you're not able to sit down and, fire us up on your computer or whatever, or, well, you can really do it on your phone or whatever. But if you're trying to do something else and you just want to listen, you can listen to us now on YouTube Podcasts. So we'll have to see how that goes, and we'll see where it goes from there. All right. Well, I guess we will see you guys Monday night at 8 when we do The Force Awakens.
Yes, sir.
So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.